I read this article that almost made me fall from my chair. The title was "The Buddha Never Taught Supernatural Powers." So this is of course a very big mistake, so I just had to make this video about it. Hi, I'm Conrad Rowe, founder of the Greater Human Potential Academy, where we teach people how to develop and how to use the hidden powers of the human mind. So how did this whole story start? It all started with Nong. Nong is a boy, 8 years old, and the parents of Nong say that Nong is anagami, which means a partially enlightened person. So partially enlightened means the person is still born in this life, but then will not be born again in reincarnation in the physical realm in a next life. So basically, this is the last life on earth, on the physical plane. Now, Nong has this technique where he uses what they call mind connection. And according to his parents, he would connect with the minds of people around him, and then those people would be able to receive insights or lessons, teachings from the Buddha through Nong. So that is a form of telepathy if you want. It could be classified as a form of telepathy if that's really what's going on. I've never met Nong, I've never been through the process, so I don't know. But anyway, they started to organize workshops and events, and we had social media managers that started to post a lot of things on all the different social media channels. So more and more people got to know about this mind connection technique that Nong is using. And of course, you will also encounter some people that are not so pleased with it. You encounter some people that maybe worry about the child maybe being used by the parents as a sort of income. So then you had other people that worried about maybe those teachings were not really part of Buddhism, or maybe false teachings. So a complaint got filed by the National Office of Buddhism. Now, National Office of Buddhism in Thailand is the organization that basically has to check if there's no false teachings being spread as Buddhism. Basically teachings that go in against what is taught in the scriptures of Buddhism. More about that later. Now, first, this organization, the National Office of Buddhism, normally it talks about the teachings being spread by monks. So in this case, it's a layperson. So there is a little bit of a thing with the jurisdiction of the National Office of Buddhism there. But the organization, National Office of Buddhism, or NOB, is also a pretty controversial organization, or there are some controversies around this organization. Like in 2019, there was a former head of this organization convicted for corruption for 20 years jail time. And more recently, there was also some things about funds being missing or not going to the right destination, things like that. So I don't know, maybe now National Office of Buddhism has improved, but anyway, if you look at the history, there are some points that created some controversy around this organization. But anyway, this organization would look into the scriptures, and basically what they were searching for was references to this mind connection technique, the technique that Nong is using or claims to be using, or that the parents of Nong claim to be using. So they went into the scriptures and they didn't find any references being made to this mind connection technique. So they came out with a statement saying that they didn't find any reference to this mind connection technique. So notice they didn't use the word telepathy, they used the word mind connection. And you need to know, when looking at the scriptures, in case of Thailand, it would be Theravada Buddhism. So in the past, after the Buddha died, many years after the Buddha passed away, groups of people would gather and basically they decided which text could go into their scriptures and which text didn't fit into their style of Buddhism or their stream of Buddhism. So you already had like different sects and different streams of thought in Buddhism. So when you look at different streams of Buddhism, their text will be different. Maybe some texts contain some things, other sets of text don't contain some things. So that collection of text they call Tipitaka. So Tipitaka is the collection of text in Buddhism, but what is inside that Tipitaka depends on what line of Buddhism you're looking at. So in this case, we're talking about Buddhism in Thailand, so it's Theravada Buddhism. And then when you look into the Tipitaka of Theravada Buddhism in Thailand, you actually do find references for telepathy. Actually, and not only telepathy, you find reference to other supernatural abilities and things. But especially for telepathy, it's interesting. There's one text where actually the Buddha explains why telepathy is not so useful in an educational context. Why telepathy might not be the best thing in some educational context. So it's interesting. So he talks about telepathy existing, and telepathy being something that can be developed through training the mind, but not something he advises to be used in an educational context. So anyway, there are these references for telepathy inside Tipitaka, or the text of Theravada Buddhism. Now, where this whole thing went wrong is how the reporter made his own interpretations of the decision, the conclusion of the National Office of Buddhism. So basically, they were talking about this mind connection thing, but the reporter turns it into telepathy. So here is what the reporter of Bangkok Post said about the conclusion of the research of the National Office of Buddhism. Not only are the alleged mental powers not part of the Tripitaka, but such claims about telepathic skills go against the 6 virtues of Dhamma, says the director of the National Office of Buddhism. And then in his title, he goes even one step further. He takes telepathy up a notch to supernatural power. So the title becomes Buddha never taught supernatural powers, says the National Office of Buddhism. So just to remind you, they never said anything about telepathy. They were talking about mind connection, the technique being used by Nong. So that's the first thing. The reporter writes about telepathy, but then he makes it look as if there's some judgment being made about all the supernatural abilities. But when you go back to telepathy, already there is a mistake. National Office of Buddhism never taught about telepathy. They were talking about this mind connection technique, a specific technique, a specific application of telepathy if you want. So the reporter makes his own interpretation and writes as if the National Office of Buddhism said that basically telepathy doesn't exist, which they never did. And if you actually look at all the text in Tipitaka, so here he wrote Tripitaka, but that's the Sanskrit term, is the same set of text. If you look in those texts, you find that there is reference for telepathy. So, okay, that's a mistake, but this mistake has consequences. First of all, Bangkok Post is like the most important newspaper in English language in Thailand. So you have all these small newspapers that look at the Bangkok Post and maybe reprint some articles or take some articles and then put it on their blogs or whatever. But they take the words of the Bangkok Post article. They don't go looking at the decision of the National Office of Buddhism. They definitely don't go into the original scriptures of Buddhism. They just take the text that's published in the Bangkok Post. So that's an issue. Other thing is, the reporter wants to write about an alleged misrepresentation of the teachings of the Buddha. But the way the reporter writes his article, he is doing exactly that. So that's a little bit ironic. Now, there's even more irony in there. In the Bangkok Post, way before this article, they write about a time when there was a celebration in Thailand and they brought some bone fragments of the Buddha from India to Thailand. And then they took these bone fragments to different provinces all around Thailand. So people could go and respect and worship these bone fragments. Now they didn't just bring in the bone fragments of the Buddha. They also brought some bone fragments of a disciple of the Buddha, and Bangkok Post writes about it. The interesting thing is, if you go look at who that disciple was, there isn't that much known about this disciple, but do you think if they bring the bones of the Buddha to another country, or fragments of the bones of the Buddha to another country, and they bring along the fragments of somebody else, do you think that is an important person? If you think that's an important person, be sure to press the like button on this video. Well, I personally think that's probably a pretty important person. Now, as it turns out, this disciple, of which the bone fragments were brought along with the bone fragments of the Buddha and were carried around Thailand, this disciple, there's not that much known about him, but one of the things that is known about him is that he stood out in his ability to perform supernatural skills. Basically by doing the things that the Buddha had taught him to do. So he was especially known for his mastery of supernatural abilities. So those bone fragments were carried along with the bone fragments of the Buddha. And Bangkok Post reported about it. So it's a little bit strange they report about that, but have no idea or don't give much reference about this disciple. And then whole episode later you have this discussion and they print like the Buddha never taught supernatural powers. It's of course a big mistake. A mistake with consequences. Of course, if you're more interested in the practical side of things, like how to develop telepathy and other abilities, I invite you to check out one of my upcoming retreats where I will teach you exactly how to do that.